fired. 4 Houston police officers pushed off the force after HPD releases disturbing video of the final moments of Nicolas Chavez's life. Was the fatal shooting truly avoidable, or are good cops getting railroaded by anti-police politics? At the state capitol, Governor Greg Abbott pushes a Back the Blue pledge to slam the door on defunding police. Will candidates and other office holders across the Lone Star State feel the pressure and answer the call? And out of the Trump White House, confirmation the president purposely misled the nation about the danger of COVID-19. I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Tony Diaz, writer, educator, and host of Latino News and Politics on KPFT. Next up, super neighborhood leader Tomaro Bell. In the 3 spot, well-known businessman and columnist Bill King. Batting cleanup, legal analyst and Houston attorney Carmen Roe. And closing us out, Charles Blain, founder of the advocacy group Urban Reform. Let's begin. On April 21st, 27-year-old Nicolas Chavez set out to end his own life and succeeded. A suicide brought to completion by a 21-bullet barrage of police gunfire, preceded by a torturous 15-minute standoff during which officers pleaded with the clearly distraught suspect to drop a steel bar and surrender. Repeatedly tased and pounded with non-lethal beanbags, Chavez refused over and over again, ultimately drawing fatal fire as he picked up an unloaded stun gun. The killing, captured by body cam in excruciating detail, has been under investigation for months. Thursday, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo released the images and announced the termination of 4 officers, calling the life-ending gunfire excessive and unnecessary.
It's inexplicable to me when they had plenty of opportunity to back up and continue to be doing what they were doing, for them to stay the line and shoot a man 21 times.
Police union leaders furiously objected, contending the fired officers followed their training, had no choice, and have been scapegoated by both the chief and the mayor for purely political purposes.
This truly was a tragedy. But the chief is now spreading that tragedy to 4 other families by unjustly firing these officers and using them as political fodder.
Panel, a great deal to unpack here. If these officers followed the existing rules, and there's plenty of evidence that they did, should they be punished? Tomaro Bell, I'm starting with you.
Clearly, they did not follow the rule, because the rule said if you feel threatened. And let me be clear about this. If you got your 28-person posse with you, and you got a man who's already been shot twice on the ground, cannot get up. He done threw the rebar at you, so he don't even have that anymore. And the taser has been fired, and you feel threatened by that. Hell, why are you a police? Because you're supposed to feel threatened. And if you got a 28 crew with you and you still feel threatened, you don't think much of your damn crew.
Got to go to you, Carmen Roe, our legal expert. Did these officers act within their rights?
You know, one of the most important things that Art Acevedo said, in addition to the other things, is that the shooting wasn't justified. And that's because a taser is not a deadly weapon. So it's not a matter of whether they were threatened, it's whether they were threatened with deadly force. The law, as I've said a million times, applies to everybody the same. And unless and until they were, they didn't have the right to use deadly force. And so I think the shooting legally is unjustified. But more than that, I think it's important to know that HPOU comes out and says they followed their training. And by the way, inferentially, they weren't trained to deal with this situation because we don't use de-escalation training in Houston, and they've never, ever applied that to these officers. And so on the one hand, they're upset that these officers are being fired and their life is over, but everybody needs to keep in mind that there's a man that's dead as a result of improper training and an unjustified shooting.
Okay, Tony Diaz, this has got to be having a major effect in the Hispanic community.
Watch the video. It is horrifying to see how a Mexican-American individual suffering clearly a mental crisis is dehumanized And in Denver Harbor, a legacy Mexican-American neighborhood is gunned down. It is a death sentence administered and delivered on the spot. I am appalled that anyone can justify that as within the scope of any sort of training. The firings are the beginning on the pathway to justice. I hope the parents and the family can heal from this. And I am glad that our community finally is being heard in court, because there's a lot of cases where our community members, these examples are swept under the table. Is it enough yet? We need to find out, because here's the bigger issue. The police need to earn the credibility and confidence from the Latino community in Denver Harbor, across the city, across the state, and we need to finally see justice for our community. I hope that it's going to be served. I want to give the system a chance, but I tell you what, I want to hear how we can promise that we can walk these streets and expect to be treated just like a white young man who's in Kenosha, walking the streets with a machine gun, waving it and shooting people. If you don't think that's a hypocrisy, then you need to get your head out of the sand, and we need to fix America so there is justice for everyone, including the Latino community.
It's critical to note that 3 of the fired officers are Latino, and the 4th officer is married to a Latino. Now, with that said, Charles Blain, what's your take on this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. I think one of the big things is that initially what we've been hearing is that the officer that fired the taser that he ended up pulling towards him didn't communicate to the other officers that the taser had been fully deployed. So they didn't know that it had been fully deployed. Now, they felt it was a threat. And for what Acevedo is saying is that those first few shots, he said, were justifiable. The rest of them were excessive. But once they make that decision to use lethal force, whether it's 1 shot or 100 shots, they made that decision and they were within the policy, according to him, that they set forth. And so it's odd to me that he's now going to fire officers for adhering to the policy that he set forth and that he is in charge of, because they didn't use their discretion to stop shooting. Now, I don't think they should have shot him to begin with. I don't think lethal force should have been used, but it seems as though they were within the policy. So it's unfair to then hold them accountable for doing what it is within their job duties. So it's a confusing situation to me, and I hope justice is served, but it seems more political than anything.
Okay, Bill King, how about some wise analysis?
Well, the video is extremely tough to watch, and it's a little bit like the Wisconsin deal that I just don't understand why these young men began firing like they did. Look, you can't call this racial because 3 of the 4 officers that were doing the firings were also Latino. The other, by the way, was Asian, married to a Latina. And so there's not a racial aspect to it. And I don't understand why. Listen, there were 4 people firing. This wasn't just one person like Wisconsin that, lost their cool on empty the gun. 4 different officers were firing at the same time. And what was it in the situation that prompted them to do that? You don't see anything in the video. And I think, maybe there's something going on the video doesn't show. But I want to get back to a point that Carmen made. This is so incredibly important. It is absolutely clear from this that we are not training these young people the way we need to de-escalate the situation. I don't believe that these 4 young men that went out that night to kill somebody. I don't think that was ever their intent. Look, their lives are just turned completely upside down by this as well. We're taking extremely young people, giving them lethal force and putting them on the street without sufficient training, and that's on us.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Stay with us as we continue to unwind the shooting death of Nicolas Chavez and the political ramifications almost certain to come. Welcome back as we continue our discussion of the firing of 4 Houston police officers in connection with the shooting death of Nicolas Chavez back in April. Panel, what degree of this outcome is driven by the current political environment and the national push to drastically reform policing as we know it? I'm going to start with you, Charles Blain.
I'd say a lot of it. I mean, if we base my answer off of what we heard at the HPOU, the Houston Police Officers Union press conference, they said that when the chief came to the scene that night, he said that this looked like suicide by cop. And somehow that changed between April 21st and today. And we didn't have the officers fired on April 21st or any time between April 21st and today. And so we also didn't have the body camera footage released. And so the only difference there has been the growing protests and outrage and riots that we've seen all all summer. And so I can't help but to think that it's the disastrous political climate that we find ourselves in that has pushed this to this edge. And so, I hate to say that it is political because there's a death that happened because of this, but that's what it seems like.
Okay, Tony, got to ask you this question. If we were not in a national move towards social justice and police reform, would these officers, you think, still be on the force?
They would not only be on the force, this would be swept under the rug. We have to really pay attention that this has become an issue because of the George Floyd slaying, because we're paying attention to structural discrimination, but go back even further. Because of crises like this, we have body cameras on police officers, and go back even further. In the 1970s, Jose Torres Campos was killed by police violence here in Houston. That led to the Moody Park riots. His family is still dealing with that trauma. That's never been addressed. So there is an evolving motion to really change this. Let's hope that we keep on doing it, and let's hope that we get to justice for everybody that's been hurt.
Bill King, is there enough true momentum to force structural change in the way policing takes place in our country?
Well, that remains to be seen. Look, there's no question there's politics involved here, but I don't have a problem with that. Politics is the way we change policy in this country, and the political pressure is out there. And look, you cannot watch that video and think that this was an okay result. I mean, this is something we need to change, and the politics are driving the change. My problem here is that I really feel like these 4 young officers are kind of being offered up as sacrificial lambs to this political outrage that's out there. I don't think I would have done what they did if I was in their situation, but I don't know how they were trained. I don't know what the background was. And for, the lowest people on the totem pole to always get the blame and for there never to be any kind of accountability and management, I got a problem with that.
Final 20 seconds goes to Tomaro Bell.
Listen, Acevedo might have said that when he walked up on there, but he had not seen the body cams. That's what changed. He got to see the film and he got to see the footage. Then he got to see George Floyd's footage. Then he got to hear about Breonna Taylor. Then he got to hear about the multiple other ones that have occurred after that. And that is why we are where we are. It is politics in which we live by, and it does affect our life. And sometimes that is the effect that we need for the change we want.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Up next, the disturbing revelation Donald Trump deliberately downplayed the danger posed by the coronavirus. In a week full of breaking news on the national stage, no story was more impactful than the revelation by investigative journalist Bob Woodward that President Donald Trump knew in early February how dire a threat the coronavirus presented, but purposely played down the danger in an effort to avoid panic by the public. Mr. Trump at the time told Americans the government had the contagion under control and it would soon disappear. Bill King, as you watched this story unfold this week, what were your thoughts?
Well, I think there's no question that Trump said a lot of things early on that were just wrong about it. And clearly this material indicates that he sort of understood how wrong he was. There were a lot of people saying stupid things about the virus the first couple of months, including, by the way, yours truly. I mean, I didn't think it was going to be nearly as bad as it's turned out to be. I was sort of surprised by two things that really, I think, took away the political impact of it. One was Woodward's, the criticism of Woodward for not exposing it at the time. If this was such dynamite, why didn't he say something at the time? And then the second thing was, I was kind of surprised that Fauci came to Trump's defense, which he doesn't always do. And so as far as this changing anybody's mind in the election, I'd be very surprised.
Tomaro Bell, the president wasn't straight with the American people. He said he didn't want us to panic. You buy that?
And the sky was blue and will be blue all day blue. He ain't never truthful with the American people. That is not the surprise for me. The surprise was that he would sit up there and tell Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward took down Nixon. I've been crushing on him since Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford and all the president's men. This dude is a beast. And he so wants to be liked, so wants to be admired. He gonna call him up and say, hey, look, let me tell you something else. You my friend yet? Oh, dang, that didn't work. Let me call you again. Let me tell you something else. You my friend. Damn, that didn't work. Let me call you again and tell you something else. Look, the whole time, it didn't matter. And for him to sit up there and say he didn't want America to panic, his theme song is Fear and Loathing. His latest commercial is there will be no one to answer when you call for help when crime is going on. This whole thing, all them suburban women, I don't take care of y'all. You ain't got to worry about low-income people living. He lives off of fear and loathing. But when it was going to hurt him, he said, don't tell him. Oh, God. Oh, my God, ma'am. Her neighbor's house was on fire. I didn't want her to panic, so I didn't tell her. What the hell? Come on.
All right, Charles Blain. Here we are 50 days from the election. Does this kind of news hurt the president with voters?
You know, I actually went around and asked a number of folks that I know who are staunch President Trump supporters, and it didn't really faze them. And I think the thing is, Bill makes a number of good points. One is that at the start of this, everybody said things that were incorrect. That Bill admitted to his. I was on the show and I said things that turned out to be incorrect as well about it. And we all have to own that. Two, I don't understand why he would give Bob Woodward 18 hours of just conversation. I don't know why any elected official, especially the president, would do that. But you know, I understand why you want to quell the panic. There were people, we were talking about the supply chain breaking down at the beginning of this because people were rushing to the stores and buying everything. However, that's very different than completely downplaying it to the American public. But I do get the need to quell the concern about it. I take very serious issue with the fact that they held this for so long, because that's why people don't trust the media. You hold it until 55 days from the election because you want to influence the election, not because you think the American people need to know.
I feel compelled to make this point. If the president knew it was serious and people acted on his downplay of the situation, could it be reason that people who later were infected might have taken more precautions if he had been put up a bigger alarm? Tony, take it from there.
Well, yes, he's at fault. And I haven't checked in the last few moments. We're almost at 200,000 dead Americans from COVID-19. I don't know how many of those we could have avoided, but by simply being honest with us, wearing masks, trying to help us do some of these basic procedures that we have now proven and adopted, that would have saved many lives. The shocking thing about this book is that it proves the other book by his niece, who was a psychologist, who basically pinpointed how Donald Trump not only lies, relishes in it, and likes to get away with it. That's really what he's trying to do to Bob Woodward. He lied to Bob Woodward, who took down Nixon. And if Donald Trump can fool enough Americans, he will beat Bob Woodward, because Woodward took down Nixon for his lies. Maybe Woodward can't take down Trump for his lies. It's up to the American people. I think they can see through this, and we have to survive. Too many Americans have died for his lies.
Okay, Bill King, you have 20 seconds to cap this discussion off.
I think we have to be careful about revisionist history here. Nobody in February was saying to wear masks. Nobody. Fauci was saying not to wear masks. The World Health Organization didn't say to start wearing masks until late April. The CDC didn't start saying it until about the middle of April. In fact, the CDC and WHO were both saying not to wear masks in March and April. So let's remember the history of how this evolved over time.
Okay, not our last discussion on COVID. Coming up, the president lashes out at America's top military leaders while denying persistent reports he insulted those who fought our nation's wars. The president this week appeared to exacerbate the impact of reporting by the Atlantic magazine, which detailed a pattern of serial disrespect for members of the military, including claims by unnamed sources that Mr. Trump referred to fallen soldiers as, quote, suckers and losers. The disparagement story, based on unnamed sources, has since been corroborated by multiple media sources, including Fox News. Whew, Tomaro Bell, what do you make of this?
I told y'all last week he said it. I knew he said it because when he talked about McCain being a POW and talk about, well, I don't like people who got captured. Is that why he a hero? No, he a hero. He wasn't no draft dodger like you. That's what makes him a hero. Because when somebody is willing to risk their life, this is not a sign of weakness. That's not a sign that they're poor. That's a sign that they care about their country and they're more man than you are. And that is your problem. I didn't need corroboration from Fox, Atlantic, or nobody. Hell, I knew he said it. That's something he said.
All right, Charles Blain, I got to ask you, this would get under the skin of some of the military members that I know. Are you getting any feedback?
I mean, yeah, I've heard people frustrated by it, but I think the bulk of folks, again, Trump supporters who I have heard who are not frustrated by it, aren't frustrated by it because it's hard to take a claim seriously when someone is not going to put their name next to that claim. And so when you hear this anonymous source thing, we've heard this throughout this presidency and his campaign. Anonymous sources come forward and say this and say that. I mean, the Babylon Bee came out with an article right after this broke saying an anonymous source said that Trump punched a baby, and they made light of it because when people don't put their name next to a claim, it's hard to take it seriously. And then I think because of that nameless claim, it's hard to say how he said it. There's a difference between saying something with hate in your heart and saying something careless. And we know he says careless things all the time. Sarah Huckabee Sanders just said that he told her when Kim Jong-un winked at her that he needs to take one for the team, and she was not offended by it. And normally, I think most people would be offended by a statement like that. And so you really have to assess how someone says something and where it's coming from. And without a name next to that claim, it's hard to do.
Okay, Tony, jump in here, about 30 seconds.
First, I want to remind people again and again and again, in front of us, he said McCain was a loser, a chump for getting caught and being a prisoner of war serving the country. I also want to let the people know what's going on right now. There's a film called American Exile where Chicano veterans who have Purple Hearts are being deported for small infractions from decades ago, including things like fishing without a license. So right now, under our eyes, he's deporting Americans who basically risked their lives and bled for this country. If he's doing it in front of us, you know, behind closed doors, he's saying worse things. So I have no doubt he said that, and I believe he said even worse.
Bill King, the president also is said to have criticized former President Herbert Walker Bush for getting shot down during the Second World War. I mean, this is kind of a believable pattern.
Listen, you know, Trump talks so much, there's no telling what he'll say. But I agree with Charles. Until the person who heard this comes forward and said, I heard him say it, this is when he said it, and this is exactly what the context was, I think the Trump supporters are going to continue to deny it, and I think Trump's going to continue to deny it. So, you know, there's been so much politicization and loss of credibility about anonymous sources over the last few years, unless somebody's willing to stand up and say, I heard this. And by the way, if they're willing to tell 4 different networks that they heard it, why aren't they willing to say it publicly? There's something about that doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Still ahead, as American law enforcement faces an unprecedented level of criticism, Governor Greg Abbott calls on all Texans to back the blue. Governor Greg Abbott this week calling on all Texans, including candidates for office, to sign a Back the Blue pledge in opposition to defunding the police. Abbott's outcry follows Austin City Council's decision to slash its police budget by 1/3 and a move in Dallas to trim police overtime by 25%. Democrats are calling the governor's law enforcement advocacy a diversionary tactic designed to distract voters away from his performance during the pandemic. Oh, by the way, have you seen the billboards outside our state's capital? They read, quote, enter at your own risk. All right, Tony, what do you make of this?
Let's see, an Abbott pledge. It's not as useless as a Trump executive order or a Trump tweet, but it's a new level of useless. I'm not sure what a pledge is or pledge does. I wish we had a governor who was serious and instead would examine police procedures. We just saw the example of more cops don't solve the issue here with Nicolas Chavez, who the more cops there were, the more problems there were. You throw more money at this, what do you buy? More weapons to mercilessly dehumanize people in our community? No, this is not even a political stunt, because who's going to click and print that thing out? It really is a waste of time, and I wish the governor would really take this seriously and try and fix things instead of trying to grandstand. Terrible.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tomaro Bell, but I think you said that in the neighborhoods they want more policing, not less.
Look, I'm going to say this again. I've said it 50 times. I do not believe in defunding the police. I don't know what that means to you all who have private security, but when I dial 911, only HPD is coming. Now, my college friends, my roadies, my Gary, Indiana people, HPD. And so I don't want them defunded because I need them. What I do want, what I do need is damn good training. And that costs money. It ain't free. It costs money. Do you all understand that an officer has the right over life and death, and he has less training than a damn licensed plumber in Texas, but he can kill you. But at the same time, a heart surgeon who can mess up has to go to school for 10 years. A judge who can take away your life has to go for 3 years. These people need training. That takes money, and they need de-escalation training as well as professional psychological people as an arm to the policing like they have in other cities. I don't know what the hell Abbott said, because I don't care. But I know y'all need to stop saying defund the police.
Okay, Charles Blain, this has got to make strong political sense to you. The governor actually supports strong law enforcement, and it does change the subject from his performance on the pandemic.
It does, but the message is completely just wrong, in my opinion. So Dallas cut their police overtime budget by 25%. Last year, they budgeted $26 million for overtime. This year, this year they budgeted $26 million. The totals that actually came in, it cost $31 million. So by cutting it for 25% next year, they're not going to have enough money. And so I think Abbott is right in the sense that we need to make sure these local governments don't defund the police, but the message shouldn't be because we need to back the blue. The message should be because we need safe communities, and the communities want police in them. I don't know why Republicans consistently miss that mark when it's pretty much handed to us to argue that the communities want this. There is polling that shows it. People are yelling for this. They've asked for this. They just won't reform. And so I don't know why we miss that. Now we're talking about tying local property tax increases to defunding the police and prohibiting them from raising it if they defund it. We're talking about banning local governments from annexing if they defund the police. So we're seeing all these little things coming down from the legislature, but there's never been a definition of defund. So what I'm going to need Austin to do is give us a definition of what defund the police means and start to focus on what the communities need and what they are saying, rather than just kind of this red meat issue of backing the blue all the time. We support cops, we get it, but it's the communities we need to be concerned about.
Okay, final 45 seconds goes to Bill King. Your thoughts?
So, look, this is unquestionably a political wedge issue that Republicans are trying to use right now. And frankly, it's scoring some points. I said last week that I thought that the whole riot issue was hurting Biden. And I swear, like the next day, I saw a 60-second ad where Biden was up trashing people that were rioting. It was really kind of interesting. I wish that we could get away from these political conversations and have something real about the policy, because I think Tony, Tomaro, Charles all make great points here. Look, defunding is not the answer. We actually need more money, but not to buy weapons and armored vehicles. We need money to put 20 mental health units on the street instead of the 2 or 3 that the city of Houston has right now. We need to have these young people trained for an extended period of time. And how do you de-escalate? How do you handle these mental illness? I think most people would be shocked at the number of calls that the police go to that are based on mental health issues.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Up next, with just 50 days until the election, the president unveils a stable of new conservative prospects for the nation's highest court. Welcome back. 2 years ago, she unseated longtime Republican Congressman John Culberson with a message of moderate and inclusive representation for Houston's increasingly diverse West Side. After 2 years on the Hill, Democrat Lizzie Fletcher is confident she's delivered on that pledge and deserves another term in office. We spoke one-on-one about how she's making the case to voters. Congresswoman, seeking re-election is like a job review. Why are you asking the voters of CD7 to give you another term in office?
As you'll remember, in my first race, I promised to be a partner for Houston in Washington, to bring a little more Houston to Washington, D.C. And in my first term, I've done just that, delivering real results for our community, partnering with local experts to write legislation to help speed up disaster recovery. My first bill passed the House with more than 400 votes. I've been working with members of both parties to make possible a $1 billion project at the Port of Houston. And I've focused on healthcare. And in the House, we have passed legislation to bring down the cost of prescription drugs and to protect our care.
Congresswoman, 2 years ago, we talked a lot about better protecting folks in CD7 from storms like Harvey. Are we making progress?
I've worked with the city, the county, and federal leaders on both sides of the aisle to prioritize work on that issue. In fact, I brought a congressional hearing down here to our district to talk about preparation for hurricanes just last summer, to hear from our local experts and to bring our science committee here. So there's a lot of work we can do. I've introduced legislation to help build stronger and more resilient infrastructure. And I think those are the kinds of things we can do, and we can do in a bipartisan way. And for our own community in particular, one of the things that I have been focused on and am very proud of is that, you know, I've worked to make sure that we can speed up the Harvey recovery funding and get it here. And I led a bipartisan effort that the president signed into law to get those $4 billion in disaster relief funds released for our area.
The pandemic has delivered a crushing blow to the Texas energy industry, which has a huge presence in your district. Your opponent, Mr. Hunt, has repeatedly claimed that you are not a fierce enough advocate for them. What is your response?
My opponent has been saying things that he wishes were true, but just are not. And it's especially true when it comes to energy and my advocacy for energy and for the people who live and work in my district. I am proud to represent the energy capital of the world. And I know that we here in Houston have the expertise and the drive to address what people in the industry refer to as the dual challenge, right? Meeting the growing demand for energy around the world while reducing carbon emissions and battling climate change. And here in Houston, we are the ones leading the way. I've worked with people and businesses upstream, midstream, downstream, from service companies to super majors headquartered in my district, to bring people together to plan for our energy future and to make sure that Houston stays the energy capital of the world. And I've spoken out against members of my own party who want to, say, ban fracking. I voted against members of both parties who wanted to ban offshore drilling. And I published an op-ed with my Republican colleague from Louisiana, Garrett Graves, about why. I also published an op-ed in the Houston Chronicle opposing the Green New Deal. I mean, the list is long. I'm the chair of the Science Committee's Energy Subcommittee, and I'm the co-chair of the Natural Gas Caucus. So there's so much to say about what I have done and my work in energy because it's so central to my district.
For the record, what's your position on defunding police?
We need thoughtful and meaningful approach to the questions that are being asked right now and the national conversation that we're having. But I don't, and I've never supported an effort to defund the police. And we haven't done so here in our community. So that does not represent what our community wants to do. And that is not the message that I'm taking to Washington. Public safety is the first responsibility of government. And certainly when our neighbors are shot by police, then we need to be able to investigate how that's happened and to implement changes to prevent it from happening again. And what worries me right now about this conversation in particular and these conversations in general is that everyone deserves to feel safe. But we are seeing people weaponize this conversation to sow fear and division. And I think that that's a failure of leadership.
You can find our interview with Republican challenger Wesley Hunt on fox26houston.com. And still to come, big outside Democratic dollars now heating up the battle for control of the Texas House. Could this be the year Republicans lose their stranglehold on power in Austin? With their eye on a realistically attainable prize, a Democratic Political Action Committee is pumping $6 million into the campaign to win control of the Texas House. The Democrats need to flip 9 seats to pull off the power shift, and 6 of the battleground races are in the greater Houston area. Here's some races to watch closely. The open HD 138 seat, pitting Republican Lacey Hall versus Democrat Akila Basie. The challenge of Democrat Ann Johnson and HD 134 to unseat Republican incumbent Sarah Davis, and the battle for HD 26 between Democrat Sarah DeMarchant and Republican J.C. Jetton. That's it. Democratic incumbents Gina Kalani and John Rosenthal are hardly shoe-ins for election. Okay, Charles Blain, I know you follow this stuff pretty closely. What do you think of this influx of Democratic money?
I think it's interesting, particularly in House District 134, which is the district I live in, Sarah Davis. She's always been the most moderate Republican in the House and a friend to the Democrats, and they haven't put up serious challenges before. But it seems like this time they're really going after her. But what I will say is that while we disagree on a whole host of things, she does know the district really well, and I do think that she knows it better than most and might prevail in that. But I think even though we got these races where Republicans are going to try to hold on and Democrats are trying to take these away, we've got some where Republicans might gain seats. Like you mentioned 135 with Justin Ray and John Rosenthal. I think Justin Ray might be able to take that seat back. And then 132 with Gina Kalani running against Schofield, who's trying to reclaim that seat. He might get that back. And then even up in North Texas, you got 113. It was a seat that was flipped last time, and a young guy named Will Douglas is going after Retta Bowers, and he might take that seat. So we've got some where Republicans might flip it back. So I'm not going to write it off for the Democrats just yet.
Okay, Tony, when I talk to analysts, they say this may be the Democrats' biggest chance to make hay on November 3rd in Texas. There's a real chance that they could take the House.
Oh, it's really exciting. You mentioned Akila Basie running there in the Spring Branch area. That seat was abandoned by Bohawk because he only won by 47 votes. So he knew
he can hang it up. That race is over.
He knew those days were over. Additionally, you talked about Sarah Davis, centrist. She supported the Texas Show Me Your Papers law, which profiles Latinos. So she's not centrist. She's far right. Her opponent, I want to say her opponent's name. Ann Johnson. Ann Johnson is the Democrat who is running against Sarah Davis. Ann Johnson would not have voted for the Texas Show Me Your Papers law. It's on. Democrats, let's show up. Let's take the House.
Okay, Bill King, I'm going to count on you for a little civics lesson. A majority in the House means they pick the House Speaker. What does that do in Austin in terms of a power shift?
Well, let me tell you why this is so important is because this is a census year, and we redistrict next year, and we redistrict the congressional races, and that's why everybody is interested in control of the state legislatures, really all around the country, but these are close. The people that I talk to about this put this at about a 50-50 chance of the Democrats taking it back. So I think that's why you've seen this investment by the Democratic PAC. There's some big Republican money being spent on it as well. I think it'll go right down to the wire. Let me just say, Sarah Davis is not far right by any stretch of the imagination. She's my state representative as well, and I would bet serious money on Sarah holding that seat.
Tomaro Bell, would you welcome a sharing of power in Austin as a balance?
I'm looking forward to this election year because, as you all know, whenever it's election, I'm at the West Gray location. So everybody that you all have mentioned, I've seen them out there campaigning hard and campaigning heavy. And I have to agree with Bill. You cannot call Sarah Davis far right. I'm serious. That's just not a true picture. But okay. I am really hoping, because I've been told that if the Democrats take the House, the Speaker of the House is going to be none other than Symphonia Thompson. So I hope that they do take the House.
Well, you heard it here first. Up next, my take on enforcing our laws without the terrible cost of taking so many lives. Stay with us. Welcome back. Maybe I'm just naive or simply unsophisticated. But as I considered the killing of Nicolas Chavez this week, I kept circling back to the same stubborn question. Why is it that a society advanced enough to map the human genome or store the entire contents of a library on a single microchip can't seem to figure out a way to subdue a person seeking to hurt themselves or others without killing that person in the process? I mean, seriously, how technologically challenging would it be to innovate deployable netting capable of immobilizing a suspect suffering a dangerous breakdown? Or instead of firing rubber or even real bullets, is it beyond reason to have the capability of shooting a tranquilizing dart to incapacitate suspects when the situation allows? I like to think that's what we do if a rare wild animal escaped captivity. Why is it that same option not part of law enforcement's arsenal for fellow humans? We certainly have highly trained, well-equipped SWAT teams. Is it too much to ask for highly trained, well-equipped, non-lethal capture squads? Now, maybe this all sounds like progressive pie in the sky or even science fiction, but I'm convinced we have to do something different. something better, or more damaged people like Nicolas Chavez will die unnecessarily because we were too cheap or too lazy to value their troubled lives as much as our own. That's all my time. Thanks for joining us. The conversation continues on a national level with Fox News Sunday. From all of us here, have a safe and healthy week.